So I do think that, Nicolle, rumblings are different from any kind of pulling the trigger on any personnel moves, right? And I think that everybody is subject to rumblings at one point or another inside this West Wing, as we've seen over the last year. Yes, in particular, some of the things that you've mentioned that have happened in recent days and recent weeks have put John Kelly under a microscope that he tried to stay out of and tried to stay away from, in large part, in the beginning of his tenure. But think about when that started to change. It's when he started to take on, I think, more of a role in the policy piece of this on Capitol Hill. He was always involved sort of behind the scenes, but he took a more public-facing role when it came to the immigration debate and the debate that is happening now. He was out in public more. He was out on the Hill more. He stopped and talked with reporters, which is where he got into some trouble yesterday with those comments about as you mentioned, DACA recipients or dreamers, some of them being too lazy to get off their asses, doubling down on that again, saying they couldn't get off the couch to our NBC News crew yesterday late into the evening. So keep in mind that this is, and I'm racking my brain here, so Phil or Nicolle jump in, but this is one of the first sort of crises of management for John Kelly. Much was made when he came in, both privately to us, to reporters, and publicly, and according to my sources as well, that he was going to put some processes in place for personnel. That was the thing. He wasn't going to stop Donald Trump's tweeting, and he always said that from the very beginning. I think people had an unrealistic expectation that he was going to be jumping on the phone and like covering the button. That never happened. But there was plenty of talk about the staff, that he was the chief of staff.
Yeah.
Rob Porter's staff. This is obviously a problem, and this is really the first time, I think, that John Kelly has had to grapple with something like this in an area that is strictly his. It is all his.
Hallie Jackson, we're always grateful when we get to snag you. I know this is a tough time for you. We're going to let you go for your other responsibilities, but we're going to add to the conversation our table. Nick Confessore, New York Times political reporter and MSNBC contributor. Journalist Alicia Menendez, now contributing editor for the website Bustle. Jason Johnson, politics editor for The Root and an MSNBC contributor. And conservative commentator and MSNBC contributor Charlie Sykes, who I have to say, I could see your shot, and I could see you guffawing and muttering the way I usually do when I watch the news at night. So I'm going to start with you, Charlie Sykes. Your thoughts, your observations about what it looks like when a White House obviously doesn't have sort of command and control of the basic functions of government. I mean, this person, if he works on the White House staff in a normal White House, would have been investigated by the FBI. These sorts of things would have been brought to the attention of the White House counsel and the White House chief of staff. Those systems either broke down or they knew about it and did nothing. Your thoughts?
Yeah, either way, it's not a pretty picture. It's almost malfeasance, though, to put somebody in that position without doing basic vetting. So they either had no idea this was out there, which is bad enough, or they knew and somebody decided to ignore it, which in some ways is worse. But you think about this administration and how many of the problems have been created by bringing in this kind of, just the cast of characters that Donald Trump has surrounded himself with.
You mean a Russian spy, a guy stealing Russian sanctions from the dais of the inauguration? Let's see.
You get
the list goes on.
From Steve Bannon to Carter Page. You think about, how much this has contributed to the dysfunction, but also there's a real blind spot here. If, in fact, these allegations are true, how could they possibly have overlooked it? And then why would General Kelly, when the questions are raised, not immediately recognize, what the end game was going to be here?
Alicia, I want to ask you about this episode in the context of sort of this moment in culture, because you exist and report on that intersection. But since the MeToo movement really picked up steam, Donald Trump's, more than a dozen accusers have sort of had a second round of telling their stories. Donald Trump backed an accused pedophile in a special election. And now someone probably among the top 3-4 closest advisors to the president announced his departure today after news accounts surfaced that he had been abusive to his 2 former wives. What does the picture start to look like in the context of this moment where women are sort of finding their voices and a tipping point, they're speaking out? I mean, do you see this as unrelated, or do you think that's the backdrop?
Oh, no, it absolutely is the backdrop. And I think part of the conversation is that, when we talk about Me Too, a lot of the attention is focused on the perpetrators of the misconduct, and that's an important part of the conversation. But the bigger conversation is about institutions that allow this type of behavior to exist. So the fact that you have a White House where possibly people knew about this, didn't take action, came to his defense, didn't want him to resign, is almost as problematic as the behavior itself.
Yeah, I mean, let me read this to you, Nick, from last night, the Washington Post reporting, and I still have Phil Rucker, so I want to get your thoughts too, Phil. So, Nick, the Washington Post reporting, senior White House official to resign after allegations of abuse. Senior West Wing aide spent part of Wednesday morning preparing for the fallout from his departure. Many senior officials, including Kelly, urged Porter to stay, according to White House advisors. In light of what Alicia said, I mean, anyone that urged him to stay, that has reason to believe these are true, is now kind of enabling someone who is accused of abuse to keep one of the most powerful positions in the world.
You know, I'm reminded of a few months ago when John Kelly came out to the press room and kind of lectured the press about, you know, the good old days. And one of those things was back when women were treated sacredly. And this reminds me that the idea of women as sacred and untouchable and virtuous often goes hand in hand with a failure to actually protect women from harm. And in this case, it seems like the White House was aware of the allegations in principle for many months, and it seems as though perhaps the knowledge of the photographs, which were published by the Daily Mail, only came out in recent days, and that's only the point at which they decided they had to act. And what did they do with those photos? They said, stay, we will defend you and protect you.
It's really stunning, and so many of, you know, just to pull your thread through, so many of these stories have hit a tipping point when photographic indisputable evidence emerges.
Yes, yes, and that's the problem. You remember a couple years ago the Ray Rice situation, right? You had this athlete that there had been reports of domestic abuse and the league doesn't do anything about it until it's visual. Why do we have to have a picture, right? I mean, now look, allegations aren't the only reason you should lose your job. There should be an investigation. But if there is an investigation, can't we just believe women? Can't we just believe the words that women express? Does there have to be some sort of graphic, embarrassing photo before people are compelled to actually do the right thing? And what really concerns me, whether it's Posner or the accusations against Bannon by his old wife or accusations against the president by his previous wives, is you can't tell me you can't find other qualified people. Right. I'm pretty confident.
The vast majority of men have not abused women.
Exactly, exactly. I'm pretty sure you can find people who don't have this in their background. And so it leads me to believe that they don't care. Or that they don't believe women and that they're willing to keep these people anyway, because there are other people that are not going to have that problem.
And I would say equally alarming is Sarah Huckabee Sanders saying of the president's accusers, well, he won the election and that answers those questions.
It's been litigated. Phil Rucker, while we have you, I want to ask you where things stand. You know, this is the third day this week where we've written 5 different leads for this show, but we're also at a moment where another thing on John Kelly's plate is trying to figure out how and whether to release the Democratic rebuttal memo, which I understand the Justice Department and the FBI to be very eager to come out to paint a fuller, more accurate picture of that FISA process. Where do you understand things to stand at this hour?
Well, we're told that it's under review right now. The president and the chief of staff at the White House have it. You know, they have a few days here to decide whether to object to the release. We could expect a decision perhaps tomorrow, perhaps Friday. And the kind of working theory based on our reporting is that he's likely to approve the release of the memo with some redactions. Now, it's important to remember that the president approved the release of the Republican memo without any redactions, even though the FBI requested some redactions. We're not sure yet whether the FBI has requested redactions on the Democratic memo, what those redactions might be, or what sorts of other redactions the president might want to recommend. But the word is that memo is likely to be approved with whatever redactions the White House asks for.
Nick, what do you think the stakes are for the White House in this fuller picture being painted? There are 2 schools of thought emerging. One, the damage has been done to the FBI. Some polls showing that Republicans now distrust the FBI more than they did before this whole episode. Another school of thought being that this was such a dud that the president has moved on to smearing the FBI agents who are one of his favorite targets. Where do you come down?
Look, I don't think he has much to lose by allowing the memo to come out. I think the damage is done, and I think he does most of the damage to the FBI on Twitter. And by transmitting his thoughts to Fox and other outlets that have amplified his message. The debate over the memo is mostly taking place like in the intelligentsia. And the real battle is over the public perception of law enforcement and its legitimacy. And I think he is winning that battle against its legitimacy.
That's so depressing. Charlie Sykes, can you broaden this out to some real-world consequences of Donald Trump's ongoing war against the FBI and the Justice Department?
Well, I mean, it's going to do a long-term institutional damage. There's no question about it. But I also agree that he has been winning that messaging war. They have set that. They've set a narrative, for the last week or so. The memo itself that was released last Friday was a dud, but the release the memo campaign was a success. And it continues. It continues to be a success. And every single day they seem. By the way, I've sort of spent some time in conservative media, and to say that he has succeeded in turning around the conservative media to get them to buy into his attempt to discredit and delegitimize the FBI is putting it mildly. Now, what long-term effects this will have on the Mueller investigation, I don't know. But there's no question about it when you're seeing numbers like Republicans, 70-some% of Republicans losing confidence in the nation's law enforcement institutions. That's an extraordinary moment in our politics, and it's going to have long-term damage.
I'm going to predict right here and now it's one he's going to grow to regret. Phil Rucker, thank you for starting us off. When we come back, remarkable new reporting from the Washington